Hello, I'm Paul Sheesley, and today we're talking about how to evaluate executive performance in a way that actually drives growth. I'm bringing this up for three reasons. First, executive performance reviews are too focused on outputs. They look at numbers, goals, deliverables, revenue, retention, strategic milestones, but they often miss the leadership behaviors that shape those outcomes. The second reason is that executives do not just perform through tasks, they perform through decisions, relationships, communication, emotional regulation, conflict, and the environment they create around them. Third, when reviews are too shallow, which they often are, they become either political, they can become vague, or they're overly numerical. And a leader may leave with a rating, but not with a clear understanding of how or what they actually need to lead. So why me? I'm a psychotherapist and an executive coach, founder of EPC Leadership, Executive Performance Coaching. I work with CEOs, senior leaders, and executive teams in high pressure environments where performance is not just what about gets done, but about how a leader's inner architecture, strategic alignment, and adaptive leadership shape the system around them. So today, I want to walk through a better way to think about executive performance reviews, not as an HR event, but as a leadership growth system. Most reviews measure the result, not the leadership system behind it. The first problem with many executive performance reviews is they confuse outcomes with performance. Now, outcomes matter. Executives should be accountable for results. They should be accountable for execution, their strategic process, financial performance, team health, and organizational outcomes. But a leader can hit a number while damaging trust. A leader can deliver a result while exhausting a team. And a leader can grow revenue while creating dependency. And a leader can look successful externally while being costly internally. So if the review only asks, did this executive hit the target? It misses the deeper leadership question. So what kind of system did this leader create in order to get the result? Should be the question. This is where executive evaluation needs to become more sophisticated. Because at the executive level, performance is not just individual productivity, it's a system impact. It shows up in quality of decisions, clarity of meetings, whether people know the trade-offs. It's going to show up in whether the team can tell the truth upwards and whether the strategy reaches Tuesday morning behavior. It shows up in whether the leader's emotional state becomes part of the operating climate. This is why a strong review does not only evaluate what happened, it evaluates the leadership conditions that produced what happened. So I found that executive performance has three layers. When I think about executive performance, I think about the business performance. Did the leader deliver on the role? Did they move the business forward and did they execute the strategy? And did they meet the measurable expectations attached to their position? That layer matters, and it's a visible scoreboard. Now, the second layer is leadership behavior. Did the leader communicate or communicate well? How did they make decisions? How did they handle pressure? How did they manage conflict? Did they build trust? Did they create clarity? Did they avoid hard conversations, overfunction, disappear? Did they centralize too much around themselves? That layer matters because behavior is the bridge between intent and impact. Now, the third layer, which I think is one of the more important, is the system effect. What happened to the people, culture, and organization around that leader? Did the team become stronger? Did others around the leader become more capable? Did the decision velocity ultimately improve? And is the organization more aligned? Did people understand what mattered most? And did the leader build capacity or did they create bottlenecks? That third layer is often overlooked, and it is one of the most important because senior leaders are not just responsible for their own performance, they're responsible for the performance environment they create. This is the difference between a basic review and an executive review. You're not only asking, did this person do the job? You're asking, did this person increase the leadership capacity of the system? Evaluate decision quality, not just decision outcomes. Is one of the most important areas in executive performance is decision quality. Executives are paid to make decisions under uncertainty. They rarely have complete information. They're often navigating competing priorities, board pressure, stakeholder pressure, emotional pressure, political pressure, and time. So one of the review questions should be, how well does this executive make decisions when the conditions are imperfect? Not every good decision produces an immediate good outcome, and not every good outcome came from a good decision. Sometimes people get lucky, and sometimes they avoid the hard thing and still benefit temporarily. Sometimes they make the right call, but external conditions work against them. So the review has to evaluate the quality of the decision process. Did the leader define the real problem? Did they separate signal from noise? Could they identify the trade-offs, consult with the right people, move quickly enough, communicate clearly, and did they own consequences as they came? This matters because poor decision process will spread. If the executive is unclear, the team also becomes unclear. And if the executive delays, the organization ultimately waits. Just the same as if the executive overreacts, the system will become reactive. If the executive cannot tolerate ambiguity well, the team starts pretending things are more certain than they are. So the decision quality is not just a cognitive skill, it is an organizational force. So when evaluating an executive, the question is not simply, did they make decisions? The better question is, did this leader improve the quality of judgment around them? Or did they distort it? So the next category is strategic alignment. Many executives believe they are aligned because they can repeat a strategy, but alignment is not agreeing in a meeting. It's not the same. Alignment is translation. So did the leader translate the strategy into priorities, calendars, metrics, coaching, meetings, decisions, and trade-offs? This is what I call the Tuesday test. If the strategy is real, it should show up on Tuesday. It should show up in what gets prioritized, what gets measured, what gets funded. It should show up what the leader says yes to. It should show up in what the leader says no to. It should show up in what conversations happen repeatedly and are measured. So in the executive performance review, I encourage those to ask, did this leader create an operational clarity? Did their team around them know what mattered the most? And did they reduce competing priorities? Were they able to articulate and make trade-offs visible? Did they translate enterprise strategy into functional execution? And did they help people understand not just what we're doing, but why it matters? And this is where many leaders struggle. They understand the strategy. They can talk about the strategy. They may even believe deeply in the strategy, but they do not prioritize it. So the people underneath them hear the message, but continue working inside the same old system. That is not a communication problem. That is an alignment problem. And it belongs in the review. Because an executive who cannot translate strategy into behavior is not fully performing at the executive level. So we also want to evaluate emotional intelligence as executive judgment, because emotional intelligence is often misunderstood in leadership. People hear emotional intelligence and think it means being nice or warm or agreeable or empathetic, as I've mentioned in other videos. But at the executive level, emotional intelligence is much more consequential. It is the leader's ability to stay clear under pressure. It is the ability to notice internal reactions without being ruled by them, and reading the room without becoming captive to the room, and to handle conflict without becoming defensive or avoidant or overly accommodating. And this matters because the executive's inner world does not stay private. A leader's anxiety can become urgency, or defensiveness becomes silence to others. Insecurity can become micromanagement, and avoidance can lead to organizational drift. A leader's need to be liked can become unclear accountability and quite confusing. So when we evaluate executive performance, emotional intelligence should not be treated as a soft add-on. It should be evaluated as part of judgment. So the question is, can this leader stay regulated enough to make clear decisions, hear hard feedback, tell the truth, and lead people through discomfort? That is pure performance. Because an emotionally reactive leader can make an entire organization less intelligent. People stop giving honest feedback. They will edit the truth. They will manage around the leader's mood, avoiding bad news. Even they spend energy just navigating things they shouldn't because of the leader, instead of executing and concentrating on the work. So that ultimately is a performance cost. So a strong executive review is going to ask something like, how does this leader behave under pressure? Specific examples. How do they respond when challenged? Can people bring them difficult information? And can they create a psychological safety around or without lowering standards? Can they repair without causing significant impact? And do they know their own patterns well enough to not transmit them into the system? So that is where inner architecture matters, because every leader has an internal operating system. They have a history, beliefs, threat response, identity needs, assumptions, patterns that have shaped how they lead historically. The goal is not to pathologize the leader. The goal is to help the leader see the pattern clearly enough to be able to lead with more choice. The next thing we want to do is we want to think about evaluating team impact. So another major category is just that. It's a strong executive is not simply getting work done through people. A strong executive is going to make the people around them better. So the review should ask, is the team stronger because of this leader? Are direct reports clearer, capable, accountable? Are they growing? Are they making better decisions and collaborating more effectively or efficiently? And are they less dependent on that executive for every answer? A weak executive may stay indispensable by keeping others underdeveloped. And they may solve things too quickly, may rescue too quickly, may hold on to too much information and create dependency, and then complain that nobody's stepping up. That's not a leadership strength, that's a scaling problem. And so executive performance should include whether a leader builds leadership beneath them. Because at a certain level, the job is not who the smartest person is in every room. The job is to create the conditions where the right thinking happens without everything needing to be routed through you, the leader. So review systems should evaluate the ability to delegate, coach, succession, decision rights, and team development. So does the leader clarify ownership? Are they able to coach instead of rescuing? And do they confront underperformance directly? Are they able to develop successors and create a room for other leaders to lead? So this is especially important for executives who are high performers earlier in their careers. Sometimes the traits that make them successful sometimes create constraints at the senior level. They're fast, they're smart, they can see issues quickly, they know how to fix them, and they can outwork the system. But executive leadership requires a different move. It requires building capacity, not just demonstrating capacity at that level. That needs to be reviewed. We need to evaluate communication and conflict capacity. Because communication and conflict are two of the clearest indicators of executive maturity. A lot of reviews say things like, needs to communicate better. That is not useful. Better how? More directly, consistently, strategically, more context, more clear decisions, emotional control, follow through. Executive communication should create clarity and not noise. So the review should ask, does this leader communicate priorities clearly? Do they explain the why behind decisions? Can they differentiate between discussion and decision? Are they able to name the trade-offs? And do people leave meetings knowing exactly what's decided, who owns what, and what happens next? Because some leaders are very articulate and still very unclear. So the better question is, does this person communication improve execution? Conflict matters just as much. Executive teams often underperform because conflict goes underground. People agree in the room and disagree outside the room. They avoid hard trade-offs. They soften feedback until it actually becomes meaningless. They prioritize strategic disagreement, or personalize it, should I say, or do the opposite. And they dominate the room. They create unnecessary intensity and call it honesty. So neither pattern is mature leadership. So the review should ask, can this executive engage conflict productively? Can they disagree without stabilizing the room? Can they receive disagreement without punishing it? Are they able to name the tension early or move from personal conflict to strategic clarity? This is critical because conflict is where strategy becomes real. Trade-offs create strategy. Priorities create conflict. Change creates conflict. Resource allocation creates conflict. Accountability creates conflict. And if the executive cannot handle conflict, the organization will avoid the conversation that determine performance. And that is why conflict capacity belongs in the review. Not as a personality trait, but as actually a leadership capacity. And so the review should produce a growth agenda, super important. And here's why many performance reviews fail, is because they generate observations, but not developing a developmental path. So the leader walks away with feedback, but no usable architecture for change and no one to follow up. A stronger review should end with a growth agenda. Not 20 items, not vague personality commentary, not generic competencies or generic coach, 2 or 3 leverage points. So 1, improve decision clarity by naming trade-offs earlier and closing that loop faster might be one. Another might be to strengthen team capacity by delegating ownership instead of absorbing unresolved work. A third might be increase emotional regulation under pressure, so the team can bring difficult information without fear. That's useful. A growth agenda should answer, what's the pattern? What does it matter? Where does it show up? What behaviors need to change? What will we measure? Who will give feedback? And what will success look like in 90 days? This is how the review becomes a coaching system. Because without a growth agenda, feedback will remain conceptual. And conceptual feedback doesn't change leadership behavior. A leader needs a small number of specific practices that connect directly to business impact. So before major decisions, name the trade-off would be an example. At the end of each meeting, clarify the decision, the owner, the timeline, and communication of next steps. In one-on-ones, ask direct reports. Where are you waiting for me unnecessarily? After conflict, repair quickly by naming the impact, resetting the work agreement. And when emotionally activated, pause before communicating urgency to the team. These are small moves, but they're not soft moves. They are behavioral architecture of leading growth. And a better executive review model, so if we were to think about that, practically, what should a stronger executive review include? I think 6 categories fit here. One is the business outcome. What did the leader deliver? What goals were met or missed? And what measurable results mattered? The second we mentioned before is the strategic alignment. Did the leader transition enterprise priorities into operational behavior? And did their team know what mattered the most? Third, decision quality. Did the leader make clear, timely, well-framed decisions? Did they identify the trade-offs and communicate the implications? Fourth, leadership behavior. How did the leader communicate, manage conflict, regulate pressure, give feedback, and build trust? Fifth, team impact. Did the leader strengthen the people around them and the system? Did they develop a capacity to create dependency? Sixth, growth. What are the 2 or 3 patterns that, if improved, would most increase this leader's effectiveness? This structure gives you a more complete picture. It keeps business outcomes at the center, but it does not pretend outcomes happen in a vacuum. It also gives the executive something useful to work on, because the point is not simply to judge, the point is to increase leadership effectiveness over time. So when we ask, how do we evaluate executive performance in the way that actually drives growth? The answer is this. You evaluate the full leadership system, not just results, not just personality or numbers or feedback or competencies. You look at the relationship between outcome, behavior, decisions, emotional intelligence, strategic alignment, and team impact. Because at the executive level, performance is not just what the leader gets done, it's what happens to the organization because of how that leader leads. A strong review should help the executive see 3 things clearly. What are we producing? How are we producing it? And what their leadership is costing or creating in the system around them. That is where growth becomes possible. Because once a leader can see the pattern, they can change the pattern. And when the pattern changes at the executive level, the organization changes with it. I'm Paul Sheesley, founder of EPC Leadership. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.